Welcome to another episode of Daddy's Girl. Today I have with me Katia, who I'm so blessed to share this space with. I met Katia. She's actually the first guest of mine who was brought to me through our mutual friend, Andrew. So that's pretty exciting because I got to hear your story for the first time about a week ago. So welcome to the show, Katia.
Thanks
so much
for having me.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks so much for joining me. So describe to me what it was like being a daddy's girl growing up.
Yeah, I grew up the youngest of 6 kids, technically. Wow. So, I think you have that special connection being the youngest child, especially the girl. Mm-hmm. And growing up around sports my whole life with my dad was something that we really bonded over and something that really brought us together. So many moments I can think of screaming at the TV because there's a game on. My dad was a huge basketball fan. So whether he was coaching, whether we were at a Timberwolves game or just watching games at home, it was kind of a central point of our life. I remember once I was on the road for a job, and I was on the road for about 4 months at a time. And just periodically, I would just call my dad. It was like a normal conversation. And one of my bosses at one point was like, "Wow, that's really cool that you just like call your dad." And I was like, why is that weird? I don't know why. It was so normal to me, but for him as like a father, it was so shocking. And I was like, oh, I guess I do have a really special connection with my dad. So I thought that was kind of a cool moment and something that's kind of always stuck with me.
That's awesome. And where did you grow up at?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Oh,
the chilly north.
And how old were you when your dad passed away?
My dad passed away. It was kind of a traumatic experience. My dad died 2 days after my 24th birthday. It was kind of a crazy story. He'd been kind of sick, dealing with, some vocal issues. We kind of just thought it was indigestion, ulcers, things like that. When someone gets sick, there's definitely a layer of denial, I think.
Sure.
And I think as a family, you kind of go through that as well. But ended up he got diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer, and 3 weeks later he was gone. So it was kind of like a car crash in a way, because you don't understand what this is, and you're like, okay, great, cancer, great, we'll deal with it.
Right.
And then when you're like, my dad was actually a physician too, so he knew what that truly meant.
Okay.
And he knew what chemotherapy was and how it was not going to work for something like this, and how he didn't want to put his body through that, really. So going through something where you're not having treatment and going from, hey, I have cancer, to I can't talk in 2 weeks, and then just gone 3 weeks later, and then you're right after. There's one point that it was still, to me, feel selfish, but I honestly remember like asking my dad not to die on my birthday, because I was like, I'm going to have to deal with this the rest of my life. I don't want this to be every single year on my birthday. It's still 2 days after my birthday,
sure,
but it's not my birthday.
Right.
So, yeah.
Wow. And when did that realization of your father actually not being physically there anymore and part of that family dynamic, when did that really become real to you?
I think when you have a fatal disease, I don't know. I cannot pinpoint the moment that you're like, okay, this is it. Because still at some point you're like, miracles happen. It'll be fine. Everything's great. What else can we do? There's doing so many stem cell research out in Europe. Should we go there? Can we fly you here? And he's like, can't even get out of the hospital bed. Like, there was no hope. But as a family, you're sitting there like, there's hope, there's hope, there's hope. Where I think, no, I know my dad was like, this is it. So I think it's a weird realization. I remember probably like a few days before he died, it was like, this is actually happening. But then you don't know, you're kind of just waiting and you're kind of figuring it out. And then, I was there when he passed away, and what do? You just kind of sit there and you're like, dope. Like, what do you do now? Like, I remember we ordered Applebee's because we were in the hospital and it was the only thing there. I have not eaten Applebee's since, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's not the best, but I had like a steak from Applebee's and I'm like, this is so weird. I'm eating like a $15 steak and my dad's dead, and like, meh. And then you process, and it's 6 years later now, and it's different. It's completely different than that time, but it's been a constant process of not only grieving him, but in a way, I have had to learn how to grieve myself and my younger self and my former life. So that's been, I think, even almost the harder transition.
Really? And
Absolutely.
what do you mean by former life or newer life? What do you mean by that?
Well, everything that you knew, or that personally, how I experienced it, everything changed after that day. So the things that you did before that day are not going to be the same going forward. And I didn't understand that until probably a year ago of like, okay, well, my dad's not coming back. I understand this. Like, I'm a grown adult, very much understand that. Mm-hmm. But I think almost grieving my former self was even harder because, and then you're in your 20s trying to figure things out as well, which is just a whole nother. But I think the whole process of knowing that there's a former person of yourself that is no longer ever going to be the same was probably the hardest for me.
I see. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, with that experience, with being a daddy's girl, seeing that process very quickly of 3 weeks, and then where you're at today, what do you think your dad's life, his example instilled in you to be the woman that you are today?
My dad's message was, he was such a hard worker constantly. He barely took a day off. And I think that's super instilled in me. And I mean, when I do not suggest this, I think I did everything wrong when it comes, not that there's something right to do in the grieving process, but I think I did most everything wrong. I went back to work like 2 days later and everyone was like, what are you doing? Like, go somewhere, just don't be here.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm like rolling through the studio and thinking that everything is fine, and
Sure.
It definitely was not. So keeping that mentality of like, oh, my dad like wants me to continue working, wants me to continue to push forward. And I think pushing forward, you can also push things down.
Sure.
So then you have to deal with that later. And I think that goes back to grieving yourself as well.
And with your dad's example and you guys' relationship with loving sports, how has that translated into where you're at right now in life?
I think, I've worked in sports ever since I was 19. So being in that direction of my life has never faltered. I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. It was something that I felt from a young age that I wanted to be a part of. But what did change is understanding that life is short and that you have to take risks as much as you can. So after that happened, I actually did make a transition in my career from being more marketing, PR, kind of the safe route in my mind and me personally, to knowing that I wanted to be more in front of the camera, tell more stories, be more producer, be on that side. And that was definitely a scary little spot for me.
Of course.
So I think it was that transition of just knowing, well, if you don't try it, then what's going to happen? You're going to die and you never tried it. So
Right.
You might as well try everything and go for it. Definitely led me to Los Angeles. I moved to Los Angeles about a year and a half after my dad passed away. It felt right to be in a city that was in the transition that I was in the transition. It's always moving, it's always going, it's always looking for something more. Mm-hmm. And that felt really almost safe for me in a way, because everyone here in Los Angeles is a little flighty, a little creative, and I felt in like my little womb of kind of messed up people, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. Living here, I understand what that is. There is a vibe of like creativity, not really sure what you're doing.
We're all kind of messed up. It's like everyone from all these little towns and the weirdos that all come here and we're like, we're going to be hot and tan and yay, and the sun.
And do all the things, right?
And do all the things.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And what is the legacy that you want your father to be remembered by? Whether it's a story or an example or what he's done, what is that legacy that you want to share?
I think the biggest example that has always stuck with me is my dad's philosophy on medicine. He was a family practitioner, but the reason that he was a family practitioner is that he preached the art of medicine and understanding the patient before the textbook, really. So if you know the patient and you know the person, then you can better diagnose someone. He was able to diagnose people with things that most doctors would just write off of like, oh, check. Well, he knew the person, he knew the like the process of everything. And so I think I've taken that as a reflection of life as well and looking at things deeper. And that's how I personally would like to live my life. And I hope my doctors treat myself like that as well.
Sure, yeah. That's a huge example
Yeah.
to kind of live up to, but I like that legacy. That's a good one. I wasn't expecting that answer. And if your dad was sitting here next to you right now, what would you want to tell him?
Just that I hope that he's proud of my transition. When I moved to Los Angeles, kind of a funny story. My first job was covering women's basketball for UCLA. Funny story, my dad played basketball for UCLA for a year. So it was kind of cool just in general to have that opportunity to have that job. My first game at UCLA, I'm sitting at the Poly, which I'd been at with my dad. The last time I was at the Poly Pavilion was with my dad. But I'm sitting at the media table, which is just like cool in itself. I'm like, this is pretty dope.
Right.
And they're doing the announcements of everyone coming out. And they're like, we'd also like to announce today is Daddy-Daughter Day at UCLA Women's Basketball. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, trying not to cry. Because this is like early on. Now I'm like, good. I can handle my emotions. But back then I was like, do not cry your first day on the job. Like, this is so bad. So it was a great test of like, just being present with having my dad in my everyday life, but also being in check with your emotions too.
I wasn't expecting that answer either. That was really good. Wow. You know, the vibe that I get from you is just that you're very self-aware and that you pull this strength to keep going. And
Thank you.
that was kind of my philosophy with Daddy's Girl is where are we at now? What has affected us? But how has that, kind of become the foundation of our life to catapult us forward to be the people that we are today?
I listen to a lot of Oprah.
Me too, girl. Me too. She's my queen.
She gets me through the day.
I am there with you.
Yes.
Oh, well, I'm so grateful that you shared your story with us today.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks.